chapter at a time. So it's taken us a little while to get to this point, but I'm very excited to continue with you. We are on chapter 10, which is Be Still as Stone, and You May Live. So I'm going to finish this up, and get into it. Cade and Christopher gathered Jack up. Cade and Christopher carried Jack away, while Nancy stood frozen and temporarily forgotten in the shadows on the porch. She knew in an academic way that she should hurry after them, that she shouldn't stand out here alone where anything could happen to her. But that seemed hasty and dangerous. Stillness was safer. Stillness had saved her before, and it would save her now. She had forgotten how much pomegranate juice a bloodstain could look in the right light. She had forgotten how beautiful it was. So now, stand still, so still that she became one with the background, that she could feel her heart slowing, 5 beats becoming 4, becoming 3, until there was no more than 1 beat per minute, until she barely had to breathe. Maybe Jack was right. Maybe her ability to be still was preternaturally honed. It didn't feel like anything special. It just felt correct, as if this was what she should have been all the time, always. Her parents worried because she didn't eat enough, and maybe that was something they needed to worry about when she was moving like a hot, fast thing, but they didn't understand. She wasn't going to stay here in their hot, fast world. She wasn't. And when she slowed her body down like this, when she was still, she didn't need to eat any more than she already did. She could survive for a century on a spoonful of juice, a crumb of cake, and consider herself well nourished. She didn't have an eating disorder. She knew what she needed, and what she needed was to be still. I also have coffee. Nancy breathed deeper into her stillness and felt her heart stop for the span of a minute, becoming as motionless as the rest of her, like a pomegranate seed nestled safe at the center of a fruit. She was preparing to take another breath, to let her heart enjoy another beat, when someone stepped around the corner of the house. Nancy would have said that she couldn't become any more motionless. In that moment, she proved herself wrong. In that moment, she was as still and as inconsequential as a stone. Jill walked past the porch, bloodstains on her hands and a parasol slung over one shoulder, blocking out any errant rays of moonlight that might dare caress her skin. There was a drop of blood at the corner of her mouth, like a spot of jam that her napkin had missed. As Nancy watched, motionless, Jill's little pink tongue flicked out and wiped the blood away. Jill kept walking. Nancy didn't move. Please, she thought. Please, my Lord, keep my heart from beating. Please don't let her see me. Nancy's heart did not beat. Jill walked around the far corner of the house and was gone. Nancy breathed in. Her lungs ached at the invasion of air. Her heart protested as it started to pound, going from stillness to a race in under a second. It took a few seconds for the blood to resume circulating through her body. And then she spun and ran for the house, following the drops of blood on the floor until she reached the heretofore seen kitchen and burst through the door. Cade whirled a carving knife in his hand. Christopher stepped in front of Eleanor. Jack was laying motionless on the butcher's block in the middle of the room, her shirt cut away and makeshift bandages covering the stab wound in her arm. Nancy, Cade lowered the knife. What happened? I saw her, gasped Nancy. I saw Jill. She did this. Yes, said Jack wearily. She did. Chapter 11. You Can Never Go Home. Jack's eyes were open and fixed on the ceiling. Slowly, she used her uninjured arm to press herself upright. When Christopher stepped forward as if to help, she waved him off, muttering and irritated, "I am injured, not an invalid. Some things I must do myself." He backed away. She finished sitting and held that position for a moment, head bowed, fighting to get her breath back. No one moved. Finally, Jack said, "I should have seen it sooner. I suppose I did on some level, but I didn't want to, so I refused it as best I could. She makes it out like it was my fault we had to leave the moors, like the work I was doing with Dr. Bleak riled up the villagers. That's not true. Dr. Bleak and I never killed anyone, not on purpose, and most of the locals left us their bodies when they died, because they knew we would use the pits. They left behind to save lives. We were doctors. She's the one who went and became beloved by a monster. She's the one who wanted to be just like him." "Jack," said Kate wearily. Nancy, who remembered the moonlight glittering off a speck of blood like jam, said nothing. "She would have made a beautiful monster if she'd been a little smarter," said Jack quietly. "She certainly had the appetite for it. Eventually, I suppose she would have learned subtly, but she didn't learn fast enough, and they found out what she was doing, and they took up their torches, and they marched, and Dr. Bleak knew she'd never be forgiven. He drugged her, he opened the door, and went to throw her through. I couldn't let her go alone. She's my sister. I just didn't know how hard it would be." "Sweetheart, what are you saying?" asked Eleanor. Nancy, who remembered the way Jill had smiled when she talked about her master and how far she'd be willing to go to please him, said nothing. "It's my sister." Jack looked at Kate rather than Eleanor, like it was easier for her to say this to Pierre. "She killed them all. She's trying to build herself a key. We have to stop her." She slid off the butcher's block, only wincing a little when the impact of her feet hitting the floor traveled up through her bad arm. "Seraphina is still alive." "That's why L'Oreal pointed next to you, but not at you," said Christopher. Jack nodded. "I didn't kill her. She knew it. Jill did." "I saw her outside," said Nancy. "She was walking like there was no hurry. Where would she go?" "She stabbed me in the basement, but she'll be heading for the attic," said Jack. She grimaced. "The skylights. It's easier when there's a storm. I tried to stop her. I tried." "It's all right," said Kate. "We've got it from here." "You're not going without me," said Jack. "She's my sister. Can you keep up?" Jack's smile was thin and strained. "Try to stop me." Kate glanced at Eleanor, expression questioning. She closed her eyes. "Jack can keep up, but I can't," she said. "Don't go if you're not sure you'll come back to me." They went. The 4 students ran through the house, fleet and angry. Jack was surprisingly steady on her feet, given the amount of blood she had lost. Nancy brought up the rear. Stillness and speed were diametrically opposed, but she did the best she could, and they all reached the attic door at roughly the same time. Kate slammed the door open. Jill was standing in an ocean of books with a knife in her hand. The table she had swept clear was now occupied by Seraphina, the most beautiful girl in the school, in the world, and an assortment of jars, each with its own terrible burden. Jill raised her head as the door opened and sighed. "Go away," she said peevishly. "This is delicate work. I don't have time for you." Cade was the first to step into the room, his hands held out in front of him. "You don't want to do this." "I think I do," Jill countered. "You don't know me. None of you know me. Not even her." She jerked her chin at Jack. "I'm going home. I'm going back Serafina whimpered behind the gag that covered her mouth, eyes rolling wildly as she looked for a way out. She wasn't finding one. The door home is locked for a reason, said Jack. You can't get around that. But I can, dear sister, I can, said Jill. Everyone here has something special about them, something that called the doors. I'm building the perfect girl, the girl who has everything, the smartest, prettiest, fastest, strongest girl. Every door will open for her, every world will want her, and when I get to Moore's, I'll kill her and I'll be allowed to stay forever. I just want to go home. Surely you can appreciate that. We all do, said Christopher. This isn't the way. There isn't any other, said Jill. The dead aren't tools, said Nancy, stepping past Kate with her hands held loosely at her sides. Please, you're hurting them. You're stealing the things that make them important because you want a skeleton key, but they can't move on to their afterlives until you give those things back. She didn't know what her words were true, but they felt so right that she didn't question them. Why is your happy ever after the only one that matters? Because I'm the one who's willing to take it, snapped Jill. Back off or she dies, and I tell everyone it was you. Who are they going to believe? The ingenue, or the girl who talks to ghosts? Even your supporters are weird. I'll come out smelling like a rose. Just you watch. Jill's eyes were fixed on Nancy. She didn't see Jack move away from the others, making her slow way around the edge of the attic. Christopher and Kate were silent. You know this is wrong, Jill, said Nancy. You know the dead are angry with you. Jack continued to move slow and easy and quiet as a prayer. She picked up a pair of scissors. I don't care about the dead, said Jill. I care about going home. I care about my master. I care about myself, and the rest of you can hang as far as I'm... She stopped in the middle of her sentence, making a small choking sound. She looked down as blood began to spread through the front of her lacy peignoir. Then, gracelessly, she collapsed, revealing the scissors sticking out of her back. Jack looked down at her fallen sister for a moment. Her eyes were dry when she raised her head and looked at the others. I'm sorry, she said. I should have understood faster. I should have seen it. I didn't. I apologize. You killed your sister, Nancy sounded puzzled. Did you have to? Murder trials are so messy, aren't they? And death isn't forever if you know what you're doing. Jill was the one Dr. Bleak locked the door against, not me. I've always been welcome at home, if I was willing to leave her behind or change her. Her master won't want her now. Once you died and have been resurrected, you can't be a vampire. Jack bent to pull the scissors from Jill's back. They came up dripping red. She grimaced as the blood oozed onto her fingers. If you'll forgive me, we must be going. So much to do, and resurrections always work better when they're performed quickly. I can bring her back. She'll still be my sister. She slashed the bloody scissors through the air. They cut lines in the nothingness until a rectangle opened up next to her, showing a dark, wind-racked field. In the distance, a castle with a village in its base. Jack's face softened, becoming suffused with unspeakable longing. Home, she breathed. She bent, sliding her arms under Jill, grunting slightly as the motion reopened the slash in her left shoulder, and lifting her sister's body in a bridal carry, she stepped through the door. She didn't look back. The last any of them saw of the sisters was Jack, suddenly distant and so small on that vast empty plain, walking through the darkness toward the castle lights. Then the rectangle faded, leaving them alone in the attic once again. Serafina whimpered behind her gag. Time resumed. Time had a way of doing that. And they all lived as her safely. In the end, she was laid to rest in the grove where she'd been killed, buried deep among the tree roots. Sumi's hands and L'Oreal's eyes were buried with her. The police pursued a few false leads looking for Sumi's killer, but eventually they admitted that the trail had gone cold and the case was closed. Eleanor was slow to recover her vitality. She still walked with a cane, although she was sturdy enough to run the school without her right-hand woman and her best friend. Cade began stepping up to fill the void Lundy had left. More and more it was obvious that one day the school would be his, or that he would do a good job. Eleanor's legacy would be protected, as it always should have been. Nancy moved into the basement once it had been thoroughly cleaned out. Serafina had repeated the story of her rescue often enough that the other students no longer blamed Nancy or her friends for the deaths. While they might not be friends, at least they weren't enemies. The rest of the semester passed like a dream. Nancy was packing to go home when she heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Cade standing there, a familiar flowered suitcase in his hand. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she replied. "Heard you were going home for the holidays." Nancy nodded. "My parents insisted. They had begged, they had pleaded with her over the phone, and every word had solidified her determination not to do anything that would give them an excuse to call her out of school. She didn't want to stay here, where it was bright and colorful and fast, but she would take 1,000 school days over a single day in the presence of her parents, who would never understand. She couldn't even be excited at the thought of seeing them again. During her days among the dead, she had wondered what her family was doing, whether they missed her. Now she was just wondering if they'd ever let her go. "I thought you might want to take this." He held out the suitcase, "so they wouldn't think we'd been encouraging your weirdness." "That's very kind of you," Nancy smiled as she walked over to take the case from him. "Will you be all right without me?" "As always," he said. "Christopher and I are working on a new map for worlds connected to the dead. I'm starting to think that maybe Vitus and Mortis are minor directions. That might explain a few things." "I'll look forward to seeing your work," said Nancy gravely. "Cool." Kate took a step back up the stairs. "Have a good vacation, okay?" "I will," said Nancy. She watched him walk away. When the door shut behind him, she closed her eyes and allowed herself a few seconds of stillness, centering her thoughts. So this was the world. This was the place she'd come from, and more, this was the place where she came closest to belonging in this world. She could stay at the school until she graduated, and after, she could be Kate's Lundy. Once Eleanor was gone, to nonsense or to the grave, she could be the woman who stood beside him and helped to keep things going. She'd do a better job, she thought, of telling the students about their futures without making those futures seem like life sentences. She could learn to be happy here if she had to, but never completely. That would be too much to ask. She opened her eyes and looked at the suitcase in her hands before she walked over and set it on Jack's old autopsy table. Now blunted with a plain white sheet, the latches resisted a little as she pressed them open and revealed the welter of brightly colored clothes that her parents had packed for her all those months ago. There was an envelope on top of the tangled blouses and skirts and undergarments. Carefully, Nancy picked it up and opened it, pulling out the note inside. "You're nobody's rainbow. You're nobody's princess. You're nobody's doorway but your own, and the only one who gets to tell you how your story ends is you." Sumi's name wasn't signed. It was scrawled in big, jagged letters that took up half the page. Nancy laughed, the sound turning into something like a sob. Sumi must have written it that first day just in case Nancy couldn't handle it, in case she became less sure and started trying to forget. as she repeated them aloud. Nobody gets to tell me how my story ends but me. The air in the room seemed to shift. The letter still in her hand, Nancy turned. The stairs were gone, but there was a doorway in their place, solid oak and so familiar. Slowly, as in a dream, she walked toward it, Sumi's letter falling from her hand and drifting to the floor. At first, the knob refused to turn. She closed her eyes again, hoping as hard as she could, and felt it give beneath her hand. This time, when she opened her eyes and twisted, the door swung open, and she found herself looking at a grove of pomegranate trees. The air smelled so sweet, and the sky was black velvet spangled with diamond stars. Nancy was shaking as she stepped through. The grass was wet with dew, tickling her ankles. She bent to untie her shoes, stepping out of them and leaving them where they lay. The dew coated her toes as she reached up to pluck a pomegranate from the nearest branch. It was so ripe that it had split down the middle, revealing a row of ruby seeds. The juice was bitter on her lips. It tasted like heaven. Nancy began walking down the path between the trees, never looking back. The door was gone long before she broke into a rush. It wasn't needed anymore, like a key that finds its keyhole. Nancy was finally home. That was beautiful. That's the end. Wow. Okay. So, I'm very curious, for those of you who have been listening from the beginning, what do you think of the story? Let me know if you liked it, and your thoughts without spoiling too much, or if you do spoil it, put like at the top of your comment, spoiler, so that anyone who's looking at the comments won't be spoiled for the story if they haven't finished it. But I want to know, I have a question for y'all who have been listening, because I know there's at least a couple of you guys. Do you want me to read the next book in this series on this channel? Because I hope to do that. I just need to know if you guys are interested in continuing with this series, because it's really long. I think that the author has said that there are 10 books in this series, at least, and I think only like 5 or 6 of them have been published, so it would take a long time for me to read them, but if you're interested, I will continue reading them. But if not, that's totally fine. I'll just read other stories and things like that and just, move on. But until that is decided, I'm probably going to be reading some short stories, because I have a few collections in my bookshelf that I would like to read you some shorter stories from. And I think that would be fun until I've decided what to read next as far as books go. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching and listening to this. I've really, really enjoyed reading the story, and I feel so accomplished now that I've finished this short little book. It's been a long time since we started it. And also, as I was asked in past videos, I will be making a compilation of the just reading parts of the story into one video, so that if you guys want to listen to the whole thing, you can. I have no idea how long it's gonna be. Probably really long, like a few hours. But yeah, I just wanted to do that for you guys. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, listening, whatever you're doing today, tonight, in the morning, and I'll see you guys next time.